Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so today we are tackling a massive classic economic dilemma. What exactly happens when a totally oil-rich nation suddenly realizes, hey, we need to future-proof our economy? We're going to unpack Azerbaijan's huge transition away from hydrocarbons, looking at the raw data, the tough new tax realities, and the digital blueprints that are driving this pivot.
Right? Like, how does a country actually pivot away from oil? It is way more complicated than just finding new things to export. As we'll see today, it means fundamentally rewiring everything, from how small businesses get loans, to who pays taxes, and even how the agricultural sector operates under some pretty immense pressure.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the macroeconomic reality, look at the blueprints for the future, dive into the 2026 tax overhaul, check out agriculture as the employment backbone, and finish up with empowering small businesses. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The macroeconomic reality, specifically looking at growth, inflation, and those all-important hydrocarbons. Look at this shift happening right now. GDP growth took a huge hit, dropping from 4.1% in 2024 all the way down to a projected 1.4% in 2025. And the main culprit? You guessed it, a contraction in the hydrocarbon sector. Now, we are expecting a modest 2% recovery by 2026, but man, this perfectly illustrates the crazy volatility of relying so heavily on oil.
And to make that slowing growth even tougher to swallow, inflation spiked. It literally more than doubled to 5.6% in 2025. And this wasn't just isolated to one sector either. We're talking across the board: food, services, and even government-controlled costs like transit and utilities. So for the average person, the cost of daily living got noticeably heavier, and very quickly.
But here is the wild part. Despite that slowed growth and rising inflation, the country is sitting on a massive financial cushion. Their combined reserves jumped to a staggering $85 billion. To put that in perspective, that is 114% of the country's entire GDP. It's a colossal safety net, and it basically gives the government the cold hard cash it needs to actually fund this massive economic transition.
Which brings us to Part 2, Blueprints for the Future, focusing on the country's financial and digital strategies.
So with $85 billion in the bank, what's the game plan? Well, the government is rolling out these highly targeted sequential plans. Step 1 is securing the foundation with a financial sector strategy running through 2026 to stabilize banking and capital markets. And then, once that financial bedrock is rock solid, they pass the baton to Step 2, the digital economy strategy, which runs right through 2029.
And let me tell you, that 2029 digital strategy, it is aggressive. We're talking about deep, cross-sector investments in artificial intelligence, big data analytics, blockchain, cloud tech, and smart city solutions. The ultimate goal here isn't just local modernization. They want to position the country as a highly competitive regional tech hub, basically shifting their reliance from oil pipelines directly to data networks.
But to pay for all these high-tech blueprints, the tax system needs a structural rewrite. Moving on to Part 3. The 2026 tax overhaul and the expiry of the 7-year incentive.
All right, here is the major reality check for the private sector. That incredibly generous 7-year tax holiday, it's ending. Starting in 2026, incomes that used to be completely tax-free are going to face a brand new progressive framework. Lower earners will start at a 3% rate, while higher earners are going to see progressive hikes up to 14%. The era of zero income tax for the non-oil sector is officially over.
And it's not just income tax. Mandatory health insurance is getting a major shakeup too. The threshold for contributions is dropping drastically from $8,000 down to $2,500 manats, meaning way more of a worker's income is now subject to the tax. But there is a trade-off. The actual rate you pay on the upper portion of your income is plummeting from 4% down to just 1%. So it's a complete recalibration of social contributions.
Now, smart cities and new tax brackets are great for urban centers, but let's shift gears to Part 4, agriculture, the true employment backbone. We have to talk about this massive economic disparity. Agriculture generates a mere 6% of the national GDP, just 6%. Yet it is the undisputed backbone of employment for the country. And more importantly, growth in agriculture is actually 2 to 3 times more effective at reducing poverty than literally any other sector. It is the absolute lifeline for the rural population. But here's the immense physical hurdle they're facing. Despite being the biggest employer, less than a quarter of the country's land is actually arable. Let that sink in. Nearly 45% of the territory is completely unsuitable for farming, so they can't just, plant more fields to grow the economy. They have to drastically rethink how they use the very limited dirt they actually have.
And honestly, modernizing this sector is a steep uphill battle. Farmers are dealing with severe water scarcity and degrading soil, plus production is incredibly fragmented. Somewhere between 85 and 90% comes from small individual family farms, which makes economies of scale nearly impossible. Add in a heavy over-reliance on basic grains, which take up 60% of sown area instead of high-value crops, and you've got a sector that is just desperate for innovation.
Finally, let's zoom out a bit. Part 5, Empowering Small Businesses and the MSME Challenge.
Because it's not just small farms feeling the pinch. Despite government programs pushing green lending and business support, these small and medium-sized businesses are hitting a massive brick wall when it comes to accessing cash. They are choking on high interest rates, super tight lending conditions, and a microfinance system that's built mostly for consumer debt rather than actual business growth. If this economic pivot is going to work outside the major cities, these entrepreneurs desperately need real, accessible financing tools.
So, as the country rolls out its high-tech digital blueprints, backed by $85 billion in reserves, we're left with an absolutely critical question. Can top-down smart city tech and new tax frameworks truly bridge the gap for the everyday farmers and small businesses? Or will this transition just widen the divide between a wealthy, high-tech urban center and a struggling rural backbone? That is the billion-dollar question to watch in the years ahead. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.